Nicolas Hulscher, thank you very much for taking our invitation on Weird Sauce today. And thank you for making time for us from your location, I believe, in the United States. Could you kindly introduce yourself for our audience, please?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Nicholas Hulscher. I have a master's in public health in epidemiology. I went to University of Michigan School of Public Health, and ever since I graduated, I have been working with the McCullough Foundation with Dr. Peter McCullough, who is the president. I'm working there as an epidemiologist as well as the foundation administrator. And I will say the main thing we have done since 2023 is we have published well over 20 scientific studies now exposing the harms of mRNA technology as well as some things regarding bird flu.
So I'll start. I don't even know where the beginning is of the story of COVID, but so now we're in 2025, and the world is obviously post the virus and post the intervention, and the intervention were multifold in terms of vaccines and treatment, but vaccines, specifically the mRNA vaccines, were preponderant all over the world, not just in the United States. In Singapore, I think we are one of the most vaccinated country in the world. I think it's a 97, where it was essentially Pfizer, Moderna from the onset, with a little bit of voluntarily Chinese vaccine if you wanted to pay for it. But essentially, the government did a massive operation on vaccination for every person in Singapore, and you had to keep vaccinated. So it's multiple shots, it's up to 4 or 5 in the population, and the shots are still being given. So in Europe, the situation is a little bit varied according to the location, but as of now, given the foundation work and the state of science, I'm guessing from multiple countries, what is the current state of understanding of the damage caused by the virus versus the damage caused by the mRNA specifically? And we won't distinguish, I suppose, between Pfizer and Moderna, even though there are dissimilarities. But
Right, right. Well, we actually just published a manuscript, McCullough Foundation. It's up on preprints.org right now. It's undergoing peer review. It's actually the second most read paper on all the preprints right now. But what we looked at, and it's got about 350 references, was the convergence of harms from SARS-CoV-2 and the vaccines. And so what we've uncovered, well, first of all, 99% of the global population is estimated to have been exposed to the synthetic SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, either from the vaccine or from the virus. So, right, we've all been exposed to this highly pathogenic substance that's been created and designed in University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So this has unleashed a large amount of chronic disease and death since 2020, right? So basically, when we looked at all the data, though, it appears that the mRNA shots are much more dangerous, much more dangerous than getting infected with SARS-CoV-2. Now, most of these, what we see are long COVID cases, are actually long vaccine cases at this point in time because 70%, 80% of populations took these mRNA shots. And the mRNA shots appear to install about 7 times more spike protein into individuals than the virus does. So it super loads the body with this protein. And yeah, basically, in conclusion, we were hit with two biowarfare agents, and the vaccines, or they're really not even vaccines, they're gene therapy technologies. Those appeared to have incurred the most damage.
and internationally, how are you getting received? The McCullough Foundation, all the work that you're publishing, is it still in a silo? Because if I look at the way that I get information is generally on Twitter now, because mainstream media, you can forget about it. And I mean, I speak for France, Britain, and somewhat Singapore. I mean, there's no information there. The scientific literature is very complex to not to understand from a scientific standpoint. I understand it. The problem is it's polluted from all kinds of things, and a lot of the things are simply obfuscated. So I'm wondering, how much are you getting? How much feedback are you getting from foreign countries that have engaged in mass vaccination with American products, following advisory and guidelines from the CDC and so on? With this new research, is it still kept in silo and you get to be talked about in by some scientists but not really by Ministry of Health? Or are you getting some sort of already very good feedback from some of these countries who are wanting to get involved with that?
We are getting great feedback from scientists all across Europe, all across the world, actually, that are all studying the harms of these shots. They do reach out to us. There are various research projects underway. I know in Europe, we are collaborating with a few laboratories there, and we do know that there are a lot of European people that know this technology is dangerous. Now, when we post on social media, a lot of the times we get over 100,000, sometimes over 1 million views with some of these studies we post, some of these videos where we expose what's happening. And it is quite well received among the viewers who watch it. And it appears to have made an effect, at least here in America, because now less than 20% of the population here takes mRNA injections, right? So basically, not just us at the McCullough Foundation, but many other groups, many other doctors have exposed these harms effectively here in the United States. And so, as the United States stops, funding this technology, I would expect it to trickle down, hopefully soon, to Europe, to Japan. We know Japan actually; they're very concerned. They have so many brave people that have done so many things to expose the harms of this. Really, every country. I think most people in all countries understand they're actually bad. Now, I don't know what the mRNA injection uptake is in Europe. Do you have a ballpark estimate of how many people are
I think
taking
it
it?
was depending on the countries. So different countries had different rigidity over a mandate. The UK just about avoided the mandate in healthcare worker, which was the beginning, because the strategy was put it into healthcare worker, and then by design, then it will go to the rest of the population. That's how it went for Singapore. So I think the vast majority of Europe, not explicit mandate but implicit mandate, and therefore the first wave, probably the first two shots, you probably had a lot of uptake of that, because it went into, your definition of vaccination was two shots anyway. So I think for the vast majority of Europe under von der Leyen and the European deal that they had with Pfizer, uh, sh- billions of vials were used. We're told that billions were thrown as a subsequent follow up, because she had actually, I think, purchased something like for 4 years. So it's kind of an insane program. Um, but I think here in England, the unique aspect was the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was then suspended with apparently no medical reason why it was suspended. They just said, "Well, we're not giving it to you anymore." But actually, the reason was clot and massive brain hemorrhage and cardiac event. So I think it's Italy got massively vaccinated, because I think they were in that sort of one, lined up of being the first line of country that got contaminated or possibly contaminated with the COVID vaccine. But so what do you think what is the actual role for the foundation? Is it to bring more and more and more post COVID data and to analyze the mechanism of damage eventually to produce therapies, or is it to document this on a scientific level? What is the role of the foundation and their goal?
Yeah, so it's basically all of that you mentioned and more. So I'll go over the four pillars that we kind of base our operations off of. The first is public policy, right? So, public policy is we do give our insights as to what we think would be good policy for public health things, such as vaccines, such as pandemic response measures, etc. And the second pillar is justice, right? And so we do frequently, assist with court cases. Dr. McCullough, he's always, helping out with people who are being unfairly prosecuted or who are illegally fired for refusing experimental injections. So that's our second pillar, justice. We frequently report on these court cases regarding public health matters on our platforms. And then we have education, right? So that's the part where we kind of, disseminate videos across social media. We make mini documentaries. We make these kind of high quality dissemination materials to kind of easily convey some of this information to the public. Because, yeah, like you said earlier, it's so hard to, go on PubMed. If you've been not, if you haven't received proper, research training, scientific training, it's going to be hard to kind of know what it's saying. So we try and digest it down for easy understanding. And then the primary, I would say, the largest pillar is investigative scholarship. That is the research, right? That is the scientific studies, the peer-reviewed manuscripts, and trying to, influence policy and all those other things combined through, getting this information in peer reviewed journals. And so yeah, and like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, over we have published now well over 20 of these scientific manuscripts. And so we're going to continue to do so. And yeah, not only is it documenting the harms and exposing the harms, because we need to do that in order to stop the administration of these, because if we don't expose it, they're still going to claim they're safe and effective. So we're exposing them. But yeah, the second part is to try and develop therapeutics and things to help the vaccine injured, because there are, in fact, millions, hundreds of millions across the world that have been injured or disabled or unfortunately died as a result of these injections. And so, yeah, that makes up our four pillars of operations.
And is it a very large scale organization?
It's not that big. Is that we don't have a large amount of people really working for the foundation at the moment. We have about 10 people that are assisting with operations, but these 10 people, we are all extraordinarily efficient at cranking out the material, cranking out the work. We do have some volunteers. We call them scholars,
Right,
McCullough Foundation scholars. They offer their time and assistance
right.
in helping with some of these studies. We do have a fellow that we did just bring on. His name is Simon Trope. He is
Mhm.
actually also a master's in public health epidemiologist. So we are expanding at the moment. Actually, just a few years ago, it was only three of us that were
Mm.
really doing daily things: John Leake, Dr. Peter McCullough, and myself. Now, yes, we are finally expanding and growing our operations.
And the financial organization, so it works with like donation if people want to donate, or if how
Yes.
does this work for people who are interested in helping but they can't help in terms of the scientific contribution or time, but they want to help financially?
Yes, that's actually the only way we operate is with donations. So if you want to help us out, help out the mission, help us out, crank this research out, help us fund the research to find these therapeutics. Yes, donations are absolutely vital for us, and we would very much appreciate it. If any of your viewers do want to contribute, they can
Right.
just go to McCulloughFND.org, and they'll find the page where they can contribute.
Okay. And so currently with we know what happened under the Biden administration and the obfuscation of science and understanding of what we were actually being faced with. Um, but okay, so now you guys have a new administration and there's a new HHS. There's new people in within the various institution, whether it be NIH, NIID, CDC, etc. However, it's, I mean, anybody that knows any system worldwide, it's not something that got built and that got made overnight to be as dysfunctional or with perverse incentive as all these organizations and these institutions. So how do you think that this knowledge is going to be taken in by this new administration, and what are the chances that it's going to get acted upon in terms of suspension of these shots? Step one, I suppose, and then step two, probably treat, address, acknowledge, and help people with those disabilities if they're still alive.
Yeah, so the new public health administration in the United States currently, they are aware of all these harms. They do follow us on our Substack, Focal Points. They follow us on X. They see all this information, and that's why recently they tried to do something and kind of stop the development of mRNA for infectious diseases. They canceled 22 contracts. So they are starting to move away from it. They finally admitted, RFK did, that the mRNA shots actually prolong the pandemic because they're non-sterilizing injections. So they are finally coming out, but they're not necessarily going as far as we want them to at the moment, right? So 22 cancellation of 22 contracts with BARDA. It's part of our HHS. That's basically where they develop experimental products. That's where they develop the mRNA injections. And so he canceled 22 of those projects worth 500 million. But there's like hundreds of them. There's still so many others that are still under development. And now what they're doing is they're going to stop it for infectious diseases, which is a good thing. Or we hope they're stopping it for infectious diseases. We don't know for sure yet, but they're going to transition this technology to various other diseases, to cancers, etc. And there's some people that think, okay, great, we should try everything we can with cancers. But most scientists that have been studying this mRNA technology understand it's probably going to be a catastrophic failure again. And it has all the same problems with mRNA. And for infectious diseases, it's still going to go to your brain, it's still going to go to your heart, it's still going to instruct them to um, produce toxic antigens that are not natural. It's still going to install synthetic RNA. And so there's so many problems still with this technology. It really should just, it shouldn't be administered. It's not safe for human use, and it never was.
I think I heard on Twitter very recently, yesterday, or maybe today, the Surgeon General of Florida, who was commenting on those things and saying pretty much what you just said, um, that those things are not safe for distribution in humans. The real challenge in this is kind of the challenge of the monstrosity of the event itself and the monstrosity of the consequences of the event. So there's almost two part to this nightmare, and they're both huge. And having had no reconciliation, like as in admitted reconciliation onto what how this started. So we understand it was a gain of function. It was funded within the United States, and then it moved over to Wuhan. Whether it was deliberately released or it was an accidental release, what was the chain of event? None of this is being categorically open-ended examined, as if you said, okay, there's some issue that happened, how did it happen, who did what. Boom. So the world has no access to that. I don't know if it's being done in the United States undercover, but it's certainly not uh, accessible to the rest of the world. And the second part of it is that those responsible, somewhat either pardoned or just gone into the ether. They're not in the justice system. They're not going to have to be asked questions specifically that might help maybe in the therapeutic part of it, because they may know things that we don't know. We have to guess and put back together. So in your understanding of the situation right now, both scientifically, judicially, public health policy, and the various push that are in existence within the medical community, insurance, etc. Where do you see the next 6 months to a year of how this story evolves or end. If it does end, I don't think it's going to end given the ongoing consequences. So, where do you see a plausible state of affair, at least in the United States?
So, at least in the United States, I would hope in the next 6 months there will be no more COVID-19 mRNA injections on the market. There is a trajectory that appears that could be possible, based on these recent developments. It is a possibility, but I would not be surprised if, you know, something else comes out and, some other so called lab leak, and there's a new a new pandemic threat, like they now keep warning about Bill Gates and all these key players, Ashish Jha, the former White House COVID czar here in America. They keep saying there's going to be some bioterror attack. So there's probably plans. There are thousands of BSL-3 and BSL-4 bio laboratories across the U.S. alone. Many of these are conducting gain of function research, modifying pathogens to gain the ability to infect humans. Right. So that's what's concerning me the most within this period of time, that they do have these pathogens, and if they really do want to create another vaccination campaign, more mandates, more all this stuff, um, their best bet would be to release a bioweapon, and they would say it's a bioweapon this time, and try and increase the fear as much as possible, because the more fear, unfortunately, the more the vaccine uptake. That's now been demonstrated in a few different studies. And so that's what we have to that's what I think needs to be addressed right now, right? What we should actually should do is we should go into these bio laboratories and make sure they're not doing anything illegal. And if they are, modifying pathogens for this gain of function research, those pathogens should be destroyed. They should completely ban this gain of function research worldwide, um, and it should just go away. And then that would put us in a much safer position. But yeah, COVID mRNA injections, I really do hope they won't be administered anymore. But we'll see. We'll just have to wait and see.
And do you envisage, given what you see around right now in terms of policy and the way the administration is going, do you see a time where there would be a justice approach to this? Like there would be massive trials, people going to jail for their role in either the development, the co-development of the virus itself, or the measures which were then enforced and sold out to the rest of the world. I mean, I don't think we've had any other event in the history of mankind where 5 billion doses of a product that was experimental was actually given to, irrespective of the population category, including to pregnant women and young children. So that alone is something that has to have some sort of established precedent in justice, in the sense that, well, we need to have some clarity on the virus, and we need to have some clarity on who these people were and what were they doing with this mRNA thing. So do you think there is a pathway for just a massive justice thing that could eventually be an international one rather than just a US one?
Yeah, there does need to be Nuremberg 2.0, right? They have broken so many laws. They have committed crimes against humanity. They've done all the things. They've created the virus. They've mandated the countermeasure against it that was even more dangerous. I mean, it's actually absolutely catastrophic what has happened as a direct result of human activity. And so, yeah, this was, back, I mean, and this is, and yeah, all the pregnant women, all the little children that were subjected to these deadly and genetic altering injections. It's absolutely terrible. And so, accountability, right now it appears that all of these governments are simply too deep into it. They're too complicit. They're not going to start arresting their own people. So, if something like this did happen, I don't know, it'd have to be from some sort of external, you know uh, force. But that's not going to happen unless our own militaries like do a coup against our own executive branches. I that would appear to be the only way, and that's I don't think I don't know if that would ever happen, but who knows? And so what's also happening is, here in America, Operation Warp Speed was headed by Donald Trump. Right. So he's not going to come out now and say, oh, sorry, this operation resulted in, millions of injuries. Sorry. He's not. And then start arresting, people on his own team. He's not going to do that. So, yeah. But we do need this accountability, right? I mean, we can never move forward if the criminals that have perpetuated this crisis continue to run free. Um, Justice does need to be served.
And on the scientific level, I've been following the world of McKernan on the contamination, DNA contamination, which is another kind of shocking bait and switch. So this is like a really classic fraud. In addition to whatever the product originally intent, was, you then have a categorical fraud that you can sort of evidently show, certainly for the general clinical validity, as they showed one type of clinical result and then did not display the fact that the manufacturing thing that you were going to eventually give to your population was going to be produced in a totally different manner, which then linked to that DNA contaminant. Um, is there a possibility that we have yet to unravel all the mechanism in which those things are dangerous? So we've assessed, obviously, the immediate acute point of people who died immediately or very soon after the shots. We're now into 5 years, or well, maybe four if we eliminate the first year, of data, longitudinal data into pregnant women, fertility, cancer rates, autoimmune disease, and now a lot of work being done on brain, early aging, dementia, amyloid plaque. Is it possible that there's still stuff that we do not understand in either transcription issue, transcriptase issue, shedding issue, contamination, much larger problem, which are like almost structural problem in healthcare, like contamination of blood bank, contamination of tissue bank, which are absolutely not spoken about. So, what do you think the scientific sort of landscape looks like?
Yeah, so basically, I would say at the moment we understand some of the most primary and obvious clinical harms, right? So that's what's kind of known now. Everybody knows of heart damage, heart inflammation, myocarditis. Everybody knows of strokes, cancers. Now, basically, most people accept these injections induce turbo cancer. A new study just came out confirming and defining mRNA induced turbo cancer. So, yeah, we kind of know of all these things, but what's next and kind of untouched territory that really now needs to be looked at is genomic integration of this material, which can affect entire generations, in fact, affect people for very long periods of time. Right now at the McCullough Foundation, we are working on a paper. We have identified a patient. We're working with the Inmodia lab in Germany, and they have detected SV40 as well as spike encoding DNA. So this DNA left over from the manufacturing process, this DNA contamination detected in this vaccine injured individual 3.2 years after his last injection, right? So that's a very long period of time to detect vaccine genetic material. And so now we are having him undergoing testing for possible genomic integration with a few other labs now. And so, nobody's really looked at this. There's a study by Alden and colleagues a few years ago that found This mRNA reverse transcribes into DNA within 6 hours in a human liver cell line. So that's about the only people that looked at anything. They looked experimentally, but obviously that's very concerning. But now, yes, we are starting to look in the human actual genomes of people to see. And though this is the next area. I'm about to release an article. There's now two new studies. One of them we published with Neo7 Bioscience recently. It's on preprints.org. It's undergoing peer review now, where we did identify severe transcriptomic chaos after these injections. What that means is thousands of gene expressions became dysregulated in the mRNA injured, those who develop new cancers, those who develop new onset adverse events, thousands of genes related to immune function, related to mitochondrial function, cancer suppression. So cancers were not being suppressed, and it's an absolute disaster what we've uncovered going on molecularly. But now another new study a few days ago found what's called proteomic alteration. So that's like kind of the next step up of transcriptomic, right? Transcriptomics are what these genes producing proteins. Now we move up to the proteins, and now this new study found the proteins are all screwed up, right? And they're finding all sorts of things: fibrin misfolding. They're finding amyloid properties, and so many different areas of these proteins are being affected as well, in specifically those mRNA injured individuals. And then you move up from proteomics to biochemical. And so they looked at the biomarkers. And so now the biomarkers are all screwed up after the injections. Inflammation, so the CRP biomarkers increased. And then you have all sorts of pro BNP cardiac markers are up. So it indicates heart damage. You have renal damage, kidney damage markers are up. And so they found that as well. And then lastly, you get to the fourth tier is clinically. And obviously, like I mentioned earlier, we all know of the clinical ones, like the heart damage, like the cancers, like the deaths, like the reproductive damage. And so it's kind of this cascade of harms now that has to be uncovered. And it is now basically there for us to see. You have those four tiers. It starts molecularly, and then it increases clinically, and it's all traceable now.
And in terms of proportion, so given that the proportion of the American public that was vaccinated, are we talking about like I heard like 60, something like 60% got at least two shots, I think. Is that correct?
80% of Americans received at least one
Just
dose.
one. Okay. And are we assuming that in the statistic distribution of the toxicity per vial, that there is some randomness into that? So, are we assuming that the number of mortality and morbidity would be concentrated on a type of vial or package rather than the totality of every shot had the exact same distribution of risk? Is that correct?
Yeah, there is massive batch variability. Many batches were linked to large numbers of adverse events and deaths. Some batches were linked to almost none, minimal adverse events, minimal serious adverse events. And so, yeah, no batch appeared to be the same. So yeah, there were these. If you got a hot lot that was associated with death and disability, we do believe that's probably because either there was mRNA overload, where there's so much mRNA packed into this one, way over what there was supposed to be. There was DNA, high levels of DNA contamination in these hot lots. So you were getting a bunch of spike encoding DNA, a bunch of SV40 cancer promoters. You're getting that, and then there was also heavy metal contamination, large metallic particles and microscopic metallic particles were detected in many of these vials. So there's those three things that we really think are were contributing to this variability. And then these dud lots. So many people were very lucky they got these dud lots. They were likely rendered inactive. Maybe they were manufactured bad, or they weren't refrigerated at the proper temperature. They were left out too long, and the mRNA degraded. So many things could have contributed to that, or maybe they were just very low in DNA contamination. Um, but one thing is clear that if you did get the dose of mRNA that it was instructed to give you, that's bad. Like I just mentioned, those four cascades of harm when you introduce synthetic mRNA, that's what happens. And so, and then you just go from there of the lot variability to see, who's going to be at the highest risk, who's at the lowest. You can actually check your batch, how bad it was. How bad is my batch.com?
But do we have an estimate of, at least for the United States, you feel over the totality of the population would be that you estimate that 15% of the population is going to be in the category of like extreme burden of disease, if not death, or is it like 20%, or is it 5? And then going from there, the next question after that is, what do we know of shedding, or the multiplication effect of, let's say, those people who are now damaged, both immunologically and potentially genetically, if they're damaged, exposed to another infection, is that increases the damage and the transmissibility somehow, if there is transmissibility, or is it that it is super unlucky, they will be sick, they will have to take care of that, but once they're gone, the arm stops there. So I'm just trying to get from a public health um, image, what kind of long term sort of domino effect are we talking about potentially?
Yeah, so we'll start with the number of people that probably got hot lots. You're right, it was probably around 20%. Various studies indicate it was around 20% of batches that were lethal, highly lethal. And so, yeah, that's probably, there probably is about then 10%, 15% of the population that are at very high risk of death and adverse events. So, yeah, there's that. But yeah, so the harms, do they just go away? Like, do they just disappear after a few months? No, unfortunately. These injections induce very long-term disruptions, and they do appear to shed on other individuals. So say this DNA that was still in the vials integrated into your genome, that means you would be forever producing toxic spike proteins and shedding it through your body via what's called exosomes. Your body kind of packages these up, and exosomes can be exhaled in breath, we do believe. And it is found in breast milk, this vaccine material. So, it is reaching these routes of bodily fluids. And so we do expect it definitely does shed. There is also a study by Dr. Sue Peters, and colleagues that found women in close proximity within 6 feet of so unvaccinated women who reported to be in close proximity to vaccinated women outside of their household daily had significantly higher menstrual cycle abnormalities. And so that's basically the only study that actually tried to look at shedding. And it does indicate it is real because we know the vaccine components and material does induce menstrual cycle abnormalities. There's so many studies on that now. And so if you're in proximity to the vaccinated individual and you get those same side effects, that does indicate shedding. So, yes, we do believe this can transmit, unfortunately. Now, for how long can it shed? We did have no clue. We have no clue. If you are producing this material for years, and maybe it can shed for years, but we do believe the highest risk of shedding is, within about a month or two of getting vaccinated, when you are producing high levels of these proteins, and there is still high levels of mRNA circulating in the body, the synthetic mRNA. That's why it doesn't break down, because it has been modified to be very long lasting. So, yeah, and then we have generational lines, right? So if you did get Pfizer or Moderna and you do have this code, it could possibly transmit to offspring, and they will also now be born with the code to be producing toxic non-human spike proteins. So there's so many implications long term. And then we have fertility destruction. A study by Karaman and colleagues found 60% destruction of primordial follicles in female rats after inoculation with Pfizer. So that's a majority of the kind of base layer of eggs, and they don't regenerate. So absolutely disastrous. And then lastly, a study by Manichi and colleagues looked at over 1.3 million human women and found the vaccinated had 33% lower successful conception rates compared to the unvaccinated. So, absolutely disaster for future implications. These harms are not going away. That's why we have to continue exposing them. We have to continue looking at this. We cannot just say, oh, we're tired of it and let it and sweep it under the rug. We got to keep going.
And do you know if in the United States there's already a a wheel to test all the blood bank and the tissue bank for spike protein or for material related to the vaccine? Because at that point, then it becomes an ongoing issue as well with surgery and treatment that somebody may have. So does it already exist or?
No, there's no standardized testing right now by hospitals to or governments to be or public health agencies to be looking at any of this. They just ignore it. They claim it's not an issue, and so yeah, it's very well could be an issue. Now, as we have reached a time where like a very small amount of people are still taking mRNA booster injections, the risk is probably much lower than it was in 2021. But it appears the best way appears to be to, if you need blood, to receive blood from an unvaccinated friend or family member. And that's the surefire way if you want to try and avoid that. But obviously, if you're in a life threatening situation, you really don't have a choice, right? If you do really need blood that bad. And so, um, yeah, it is a large issue, though, basically unacknowledged, and it does need intensive investigation.
And so, in terms of the the situation around this gain of function that produced this, which we know since it's not really been acknowledged to the extent that it needs to be, which is, can you please explain the mechanism, the funding, why, what was it going on? Was it actually designed as a weapon, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, the likes of Ralph Barrick, which seems to be sort of the white elephant of that story, is also very interesting because he's been completely absent from a lot of the scrutiny. Fauci has been around, we know about EcoHealth and all this other stuff, but Barrick has been doing this. I mean, you just had to look at the scientific publication for decades. So now the situation with, in your understanding of how it started, do you believe that this is in fact the consequences of a field that should be shut down because it cannot be rendered safe? Or do you think that this is the actual first, maybe not even the first, iteration of a proper biowarfare between, two entities, and we would have to assume who these two entities are, maybe more. So what do you think the current state of the origin story of this mess is, because it's not that distance from the antidote, which if we assume the mRNA platform was the antidote, and that the antidote was either in waiting or in the bowels of that same system to be deployed as and when needed, it poses the question also of the calendar. Like, it's pretty amazing that you did manage to get a virus, bioweapon or not, but let's say a virus, and then that within months of that, you have the exact same sequence that you can utilize in order to develop something that is going to be your countermeasure. That's pretty far, statistically far fetched. So, what do you think is the current state of acknowledgement of the origin story?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, it's now widely accepted among intelligence agencies in the US that, SARS-CoV-2 was synthetic, was manufactured, did not come from nature. So we know that, right? But we also know that BARDA has been developing mRNA injections, for the past few decades through the ADEPT P3 program. They had plans decades ago, around 2012, 2013. They wanted to develop mRNA countermeasures against pandemic threats. And so they did. So these plans to inject the world with mRNA were underway for a while. Ralph Barrick at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, he's been playing with coronaviruses for decades. He's been modifying them. So all this stuff has been, it appears, so many years in the making, right? So this doesn't just appear all of a sudden, in 2019 they said, oh, we just started working on this, and oh, now it's released. No, this is a long time coming. It appears to have been planned a long time ago as well, because we do have Event 201. Gates Foundation and John Hopkins University ran the coronavirus. You can't even make this up. Coronavirus pandemic simulation exercise a few months before it was officially announced. They had all the heads of top companies, CEOs, kind of to do this war game scenario, so they would know what to do when the real one hit. So yeah, so many things make us believe this was indeed planned and it was not a simple accident, where only China was involved. No, appeared to be collaboration. Um, and still people are running free. Nobody's been held accountable. And it's an absolute disaster. And so since nobody's been held accountable, that means that this can happen again, right? That means they can do this again with something else, and again and again. They won't stop. And so rel- m- this type of manufacturing a pathogen and manufacturing the countermeasure, releasing the pathogen, and then mandating the countermeasure is extraordinarily evil and criminal. And so this is very bad. And accountability has to happen.
And I think OxyContin compared to that is like a small scale story, really. And that took, I mean, they did manufacture there a fifth sign of clinical health in the pain thing in order to actually, distribute OxyContin more. But even then, compared to that, I think that's kind of kindergarten stuff compared to what we've seen. So to conclude, I would like to ask you about the therapeutic, landscape, because I think people are gonna. I mean, it's so much bad news. And I think knowing what you know and being involved in the current development of understanding the science of the illnesses and the diseases, it probably puts you guys in a very good position to understand the lines of defense against those things currently. So, what do you think is the most optimistic, very hopeful sort of landscape on the therapeutics pathway?
Yeah, so I'll start with broad and then we'll go into the targeted therapeutics. So broad is basically, I would say, self-explanatory. If you want to improve your outcomes against side effects or disease of any type, you have to improve your lifestyle first. And what that means is, right, proper daily exercise, get your steps in. Recent study came out, getting about 10,000 steps a day literally decreases your risk of cancer, death, all cause mortality, diabetes, basically everything if you get those steps in. So you need exercise, it's critical. at least light exercise. Now, if you have myocarditis, you're not supposed to exercise, so it depends, how you've been injured, but that's key. And then diet's absolutely key, right? You want to eat wholesome foods, full of vitamins, minerals, full of protein. Eggs are very good. If you're not a vegetarian, eggs are very good because a recent study found that it actually decreases Alzheimer's risk by about 50%, which the mRNA injections do induce Alzheimer's, increase your risk of that. And so diet's critical. Don't eat hyper-processed garbage. That's going to increase your risk of all these diseases. And so once you do that and all that's addressed, then you need sunlight. You need sunlight. There's now two studies that specifically looked at COVID vaccine injuries. One looked at myocarditis, one looked at chronic fatigue syndrome from the vaccines. And both of them found when you raise your vitamin D levels to adequate amounts, those conditions significantly improve, right? So most people who are vaccine injured will have low vitamin D because they're injured, and that's what happens. They're probably not going outside. You really want to try as hard as you can to get sunlight. Supplemental vitamin D's, it's fine, but you really want to get it from. There's people that argue supplemental vitamin D3 is not good for you, and it's a form of rat poison. Actually, that is what they give rats. It's literally that's the ingredient to kill rats, and so some people don't like to take supplemental vitamin D. So yeah, sunlight, get that natural cascade from the UVA light. As well, it improves your mitochondrial function. A recent study found that as well. Thousands of other benefits. So, okay, and then you have those broad things will put you in a much better position. And then the targeted approach is we have a paper published on this McCullough protocol based spike detoxification. What this is this addresses the spike protein of these injections and of the virus, right? Because this spike protein now stays in the body, we have found for years in many individuals. Your body can't clear it. So we need ways to clear it because this is one of the root problems people are facing. And so what this McCullough protocol is nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin. Nattokinase and bromelain are proteolytic enzymes, right? So what they do is they actually have been shown in the test tube experimentally to directly degrade the spike protein. And it does reach systemic circulation when you ingest these safe enzymes. These are very safe. Bromelain's from pineapples. Nattokinase is from natto, these fermented beans. So it's very safe. And so those two things do that. And then we have curcumin, which is a potent anti-inflammatory. We do have this hyperinflammation chaos when the body's exposed to spike protein, and and curcumin has been shown to block the spike protein from binding and serve as an antiviral compound itself. Um, it actually does help ameliorate many different pathogens, as shown in hundreds of studies now. And so you have those three that make up the base. And there's now multiple case reports of people using many of these enzymes and kind of resolving vaccine induced thrombotic syndromes, clearing out these spike induced blood clots, all sorts of things. And so it's showing promise. Right now, we do need large scale clinical trials, double blind, placebo controlled, to really be able to claim efficacy. But it is very promising experimentally and anecdotally, as well as under clinical care of Dr. McCullough. So that's basically the full spectrum. Right now, we need obviously much more investigation. We've got to figure out how to address the molecular chaos. We got to figure out how to address the genomic integration. That's going to take a long time, but we're going to keep looking into it.
That's great. And so before I ask you the question and I ask all my guests, I still have, out of curiosity, whether the foundation has thought of actually branching out to other country and to set up collaboration, not just collaboration, but almost like output of your work in other country, like, find the best country for you guys in Europe, find the best country for, in Asia. Maybe Japan is obviously very keen to do it because also a very high burden vaccination. But just to make this essentially transnational, and to increase the exposure by national awareness locally, so that they don't think this is something that's essentially just going on in the US. And eventually, at some point, the shots will be removed, and that's it. I think there's a huge part of collaboration, both in terms of knowledge distribution, scientific education, but also in the therapeutics exchange and clinical testing. And I think perhaps bringing this to transnational conferences where it is the McCullough Foundation, but maybe the McCullough Foundation in France, in the UK, in Japan, where you get to people to actually show up and having to engage, not just going into websites and thinking, oh, this is like the US population and the US things. So maybe, I don't know whether you guys have thought of this and making it a real transnational push, not with the justice in mind, but rather with the science.
Yeah, that would be something we would definitely be open to for sure. We haven't really thought about it too much, but that would be a fantastic idea.
Mhm.
A lot of other medical freedom
Yeah.
organizations have done this. We know
Yeah.
like Children's Health Defense has done this, I
Yeah.
believe, and many others. And so, yeah, this is definitely something that we would be open to.
Yeah, and I think with the rigor of the approach, which is that, look, we have no horse in this race apart from truth and scientific evidence. So I think that's something that resonates with a lot of people, including perhaps scientists who are once in the opposite side, who've actually understood that they got sort of hoodwinked into a massive op of some kind. But I think it would be necessary, because if you think even something you mentioned, Nuremberg trial, any one of these large scale world event were really dealt with once they became acknowledged as a world event. And I think there's no way COVID is not that. There's absolutely no way it shut the world down. So it should be the world as a global entity that responds to it to some extent.
Yes, yes, it should be a global effort. You're right. It's not just the United States that matters.
Yeah.
We gotta. There's so there's so many other countries. There's so many other people. Now,
Yep.
America's the most unhealthy of them all, right? We've been poisoned for
Yeah.
so long. Our food
Yep.
supply is terrible, and yeah, we
Indeed.
have the most chronic disease. So yeah, we're busy here, but we gotta pay attention. Everybody else has been affected by this
Yes.
global event, and it is absolutely essential that everybody is receiving assistance, and yeah, I think it's a great idea to kind of
Mm.
expand transnationally.
Great. And so to conclude, I'll ask you the same question I ask all my guests, because Nicolas, for someone that young, you're involved in pretty heavy stuff. So what is the weird sauce that you have for life to keep you motivated in working in a very hard line of science, and to be involved every day in something like this must be emotionally, I imagine, hard. And therefore, what's your engine behind this?
Yes, my weird sauce is seeing the end of the experimentation on humanity. So every day I get up, I do this work, put these articles out, we write these manuscripts. I'm thinking, maybe this will be the one that finally gets these off the market, or maybe this will be the one that does it. And that's really what's driving this. We got to stop the injection of extraordinarily dangerous injections. We got to start reversing the damage that has been done to people. When we start to think about the population collapse, the birth rate collapses, it does start to get very serious very fast. And so all these things kind of frequently do arise, in my mind. I'm like, we really got to address this. And so I guess, yeah, that would be my weird sauce is seeing the day when all of this comes to an end.
Well, we all sure hope that that engine becomes actually the reality for the rest of the world. Nicola, thank you very much for the time you afforded us and for sharing this information. And if people want to find out about the work of the foundation and yourself, please recap quickly how they can find you.
Yes, you can go to the McCullough Foundation website at mcculloughfnd.org. Again, your support, if you want to support us, we'd very much appreciate it. Support our research efforts and our education efforts, etc. You can follow my personal X account at NIC Hulscher. I post there every day, as well as our Substack, thefocalpoints.com. That's where we post all of our in depth articles on the most pertinent public health topics every single day.
Brilliant. Nicolas, good luck, and may the force be with you, if I can say that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If this conversation stopped you in your track, share it with your network. You never know whose life you might change for the better. Thank you for listening. Stay curious about our next guest, and stay curious about life.